Hello to everyone. I'm going now to start my presentation on solidarity and hope in ruined forests. My presentation introduces a vision for a just transition in the palm oil industry, a vision that is based on solidarity and aspirations for deep and profound change. I thus contribute to hope and activism across boundaries and am placed in this panel rather for logistic than thematic reasons. The vision I present here is the result of a collaboration between Indonesian activists, scholars, and members of the Asia House Foundation in dialogue with workers, trade unionists, women's groups, and environmental justice activists under the umbrella of the Transnational Palm Oil Labor Solidarity Network, short TPOLS. The basic idea behind just transition is that workers and trade unions in unsustainable industries develop a proactive stance to transform the industry whilst defending jobs, pay, and working conditions. They can either take a defensive position or actively push for a social ecological transformation. The palm oil industry is currently ecologically and socially unsustainable. Its basic business model is based on the plunder of nature through large-scale monoculture plantations that cause deforestation, destroy biodiversity, and depend on the widespread use of chemicals. Low wages, precarious jobs, and bad working conditions characterize the industry as it stands. Current initiatives from above, like that of the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, do not challenge this basic business model and therefore cannot transform the industry in a future-oriented way. We do thus envision a transition from below, which is based on the solidarity among workers along the global supply chain of oil palm and the solidarity between workers, environmentalists, and indigenous communities. We thus work across international boundaries and the currently still prevailing boundaries between different activist movements. Environmentalists, trade unionists, and indigenous rights activists fight against the negative consequences of palm oil expansion, but they address different problems and often work towards different goals. Environmentalists usually reject oil palms altogether. Trade unionists demand better working conditions and adequate pay for plantation workers. Indigenous rights activists, on the other hand, demand above all the recognition of indigenous land rights, while very different views prevail with regard to oil palms. As an alternative to the current status quo, we propose a palm oil future based on rights-based mosaic landscapes, like seen in this picture, that are ecologically and socially more sustainable, respect community rights, and provide space for a diversified smallholder economy where oil palms are grown amongst other crops. Such a mosaic landscape consists of intensively cultivated areas, forest gardens, and remaining patches of secondary or primary forests. It supports biodiversity and prevents the soil from drying. Intercropping techniques can further help to reduce the use of chemicals. Indigenous communities benefit from mosaic landscapes as they correspond to traditional land use patterns. Mosaic landscapes are not based on expropriation or evictions. The mosaic landscape we imagine is based on independent oil palm smallholdings. People have the economic advantage of diversification and profit from the resulting economic resilience, as well as the option to grow food for their own consumption. The mosaic landscape approach pursues distinctly different values than the current palm oil economy. It reduces future costs due to climate change and environmental degradation and focuses on food security, self-determination, health, and well-being of the local population. The mosaic landscape aligns well with demands of indigenous peoples and environmental justice movements on land rights recognition and rights-based conservation. But how will the mosaic landscape model absorb workers? One possibility would be the dissolution and redistribution of large monocultures. Workers would hereby be included as recipients in the land redistribution of plantation areas, which transform them into oil palm smallholders with the possibility of diversifying their crops in the long term. Another possibility is the downsizing and restructuring of existing plantations. Workers would still work for the same company, but manage a diversified landscape with smaller agroforestry palm oil units. Abandoning the plantation economy altogether would be a third option. Workers could be trained and employed in community-based conservation and restoration. Some workers even have ecological knowledge and skills to offer in this direction that were previously not valued. We see these as possible paths that are not mutually exclusive. They could coexist, and there may be even more. TPOLS currently focuses on developing a labor perspective for a just transition in the palm oil industry that starts from the experience of palm oil workers and the ecological problems affecting them in their day-to-day work, such as the health impacts of harvesting or pesticide spraying. After workers have reflected on their own situation and demands regarding social ecological issues, the idea is to deepen the dialogue with indigenous and environmental justice groups to discuss then ways of overcoming the currently still existing division and developing common strategies. We are hopeful that continuous dialogue to identify mutual interests will facilitate and strengthen solidarity across borders. To stimulate such a discussion, we are currently finalizing a discussion paper that invites people to imagine alternative oil palm futures. I thank you very much for your attention and stop here.